Chapter 13 of Tante. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 13. Gregory went down to Cornwall again, only 9 days after he had left it. He and Karen met as if under an arch of infinite blessings. He had his cable to show her, and she hers to show him, and although Gregory did not see them as the exquisite documents that Karen felt them to be, they did for him all that he asked Madame von Marwitz to do. I give her to you. Be worthy of my trust. Mercedes von Marwitz. His read. And Karen's, I could only yield you to a greater joy than you can find with me, but it could not be to a greater love. Do not forget me in your happiness. You are mine, my beloved child, not less, but more than ever. Tante. Karen's joy was unshadowed. It made him think of primroses and crystal springs. She was not shy. He was shyer than she, made a little dumb, a little helpless, by his man's reverence, his man's odd sense of the beloved's dawn-like wonder. She was not changed. Any change in Karen would come as quiet growth, not as transformation. Gregory's gladness had not this simplicity. It revealed to him a new world, a world newly beautiful, but newly perilous, and a changed self, the self of boyhood, renewed yet transformed, through whose joy ran the reactionary melancholy that, in a happiness attained, glances at fear and at a climax of life, is aware of gulfs of sorrow as yet unsounded. More than his lover's passion was a tenderness for her, and for her unquestioning acceptances that seemed near tears. Karen was in character so wrought and in nature so simple. Her subtleties were all objective, subtleties of sympathy, of recognition, of adaptation to the requirements of devoted action. Her simplicity was that of a wholeheartedness, unaware at high moments of all but the essential. She had to tell him fully, holding his hand and looking into his eyes, all about her side of it, what she had thought when she saw him at the concert. Certain assumptions there gave Gregory his stir of uneasiness. You were caring just as much as I was, in the same way, for her music. What she had thought at Mrs. Forrester's, and at the railway station, and when the letters went on and on. She had, of course, seen what was coming that evening after they had been to the Lavingtons. When you didn't understand about me and Tante, you know, and I made you understand. And then he had made her understand how much he cared for her and she for him, only it had all come so quietly. I did not think a great deal about it or wonder. It sank into me like stars one sees on a still lake, so that next day it was no surprise at all when you told me. It was like looking up and seeing all the real stars in the sky. Afterwards it was dreadful for a little while, wasn't it? Karen held his hand for a moment to her cheek. When all the past had been looked at together, Gregory asked her if she would not marry him quite soon. He hoped, indeed, that it might be within the month. You see, why not? He said. I miss you so dreadfully, and I can't be here, and why should you be? Let me come down and marry you in that nice little church on the other side of the village as soon as our bonds can be called. But for the first time a slight anxiety showed in her eyes. I miss you dreadfully too, she said, but you forget, Tante will not be back till July. We must wait for Tante, Gregory. We are in May now. It is not so far to July. You will not mind too much? He felt, sitting under the arch of blessings as he was, that it would be most ungrateful and inappropriate to mind. But then, he said, if they must put it off like that, Karen would have to come to London. She must come and stay with Betty. And get your trousseau. This was a brilliant idea. You'll have to get your trousseau, you know, and Betty is an authority on clothes. "Oh, but clothes, I never have clothes in that sense," said Karen. "A little seamstress down here makes most of them, and Louise helps her sometimes if she has time. Tante gave me £20 before she went away. Would £20 do for a trousseau?" "Betty would think £20 just about enough for your gloves and stockings, I imagine," said Gregory. "And will you expect me to be so luxurious? You are not rich. We shall not live richly?" "I am not at all rich, but I want you to have pretty things, layers and layers of the nice, white, soft things brides always have, and a great many new hats and dresses. Couldn't I give you a little tip to begin the trousseau?" "Ah, it can wait, can't it?" said Karen easily. "No, you can't give me a tip. Tante, I am sure, will see that I have a nice trousseau. She may even give me a little dot when I marry. I have no money at all, not one penny, you know. Do you mind?" "I'd far rather have you without a penny, because I want to give you everything. If Tante doesn't give you the little dot, I shall." Karen was pondering a little seriously. "I don't know what Tante will feel since you have enough for us both. It was when she wished me to marry Franz that she spoke of a dot. And Franz is of course very poor, and has a great family of brothers and sisters to help support. You will know Franz one day. You did not speak very nicely of Franz that time, you know. That was another reason why I thought you were so angry." "And it made me angry too," said Karen, smiling at him. "Wasn't I nice? I am sure Franz is." "Oh, so good and kind and true, and very talented. And his mother would be a wonderful musician, if she had not so many children to take care of. That has harmed her music. And she too is a golden-hearted person. She used often to help me with my dresses. Do you remember that little white silk dress of mine? Perhaps so. I wore it at the concert. Such a pretty dress, I think. Frau Lippheim helped me with that. She and a little German seamstress in Leipzig. I see us now, all bending over the rustling silk, round the table with the lamp on it. We had to make it so quickly. Tante had sent for me to come to her in Vienna, and I had nothing to wear at the great concert she was to give. We sat up till 12 to finish it. Franz and Lotta cooked our supper for us, and we only stopped long enough to eat. Dear Frau Lippheim, some day you will know all the Lippheims." He listened to her with dreamy, amused delight, seeing her bending in the ugly German room over the little white silk dress, and only vaguely aware of the queer figures she put before him. He had no inclination to know Franz and his mother, and no curiosity about them. But Karen continued. "That is the only thing I can give you," she said, reflecting. "You know so few artists, don't you? So few people of talent. As to people, your life is narrow, isn't it so? I have met so many great people in my life, first through my father and then through Tante. Painters, poets, musicians. You will probably know them now, too. Some of them certainly, for some are also friends of mine. Strepoff, for example. Oh, how I shall like you to meet him. You have read him, of course, and about his escape from Siberia and his long exile. Strepoff? Yes, I think so. A dismal sort of fellow, isn't he?" Gregory's delight was merging now in a more definite amusement, tinged, it may be confessed, with alarm. He remembered to have seen a photograph of this celebrity, very turbulently haired, and very fixed and fiery of eye. He remembered a large bare throat and a defiant necktie. He had no wish to make Strepoff's acquaintance. It was quite enough to read about him in the magazines and admire his exploits from a distance. "Dismal," Karen had repeated, with a touch of severity. "Who would not be after such a life? Yes, he is a sad man, and the thought of Russia never leaves him. But he is full of gaiety, too. He spent some months with us 2 years ago at the Italian lakes, and I grew so fond of him. We had great jokes together, he and I. And he sometimes writes to me now, such teasing, funny letters. The last was from San Francisco. He is giving lectures out there, raising money, for he never ceases the struggle. He calls me Liebchen. He is very fond of me." "What do you call him?" Gregory inquired. Just Strepoff. Everybody calls him that. Dear Belot, too," Karen pursued. "He would not fail to interest you. Perhaps you have already met him. He has been in London." "Belot? Does he write poetry?" "Belot is a painter, a great painter." "Surely you have heard of Belot?" "Well, I'm afraid that if I have, I've forgotten. You see, as you say, I live so out of the world of art." "Did you not see his portrait of Suzanne Maret, the great French actress? It has been exhibited through all the world." "Of course I have. Belot, of course. The impressionist painter. It looked to me, I confess, awfully queer, but I could see that it was very clever." "Impressionist? No. Belot would not rank himself among the impressionists, and he would not like to hear his work called clever. I warn you of that. He has a horror of cleverness. It was not a clever picture, but sober, strange, beautiful. Well, I know Belot and his wife quite intimately. They are great friends of the Lippheims too, and call themselves the Franco-Prussian Alliance. Madame Belot is a dear little woman. You must have often seen his pictures of her and the children. He has numbers of children and adores them. La Petite Margot is my special pet, and she always sends me a little present on my birthday. Madame Belot was once his model," Karen added, "and is quite du peuple. And I believe that some of his friends were sorry that he married her. But she makes him very happy. That beautiful nude in the Luxembourg by Chantefoy is of her, long before she married, of course. She does not sit for the ensemble now, and indeed I fear it has lost all its beauty, for she is very fat." "It would be nice to go to Paris on our wedding tour and see the Belots," said Karen. Gregory made an evasive answer. He reflected that once he had married her, it would probably be easy to detach Karen from these most undesirable associates. He hoped that she would take to Betty. Betty would be an excellent antidote. "And you think your sister-in-law will want me?" said Karen, when he brought her from the Belots back to Betty. "She doesn't know me." "She must begin to know you as soon as possible. You will have Mrs. Forrester at hand, you see, if my family should oppress you too much. Barring Betty, who hardly counts as one of them, they aren't interesting, I warn you." "I may oppress them," said Karen, with the shrewdness that often surprised him. "Who will they take refuge with?" "Oh, they have all London to fall back upon. They do nothing when they're up but go out. That's my plan, that they should leave you a good deal when they go out, and leave you to me." "That will be nice," said Karen. "But Mrs. Forrester, you know," she went on, "is not exactly an intimate of mine that I could fall back upon. I am, in her eyes, only a little appendage of Tante's." "Ah, but you have ceased now to be an appendage of Tante's, and Mrs. Forrester is an intimate, an old one, of mine." "She'll take me in as your appendage," Karen smiled. "Not at all. It's you, now, who are the person to whom the appendage belongs. I'm your appendage. That quite alters the situation. You will have to stand in the foreground and do all the conventional things." "Shall I?" smiled Karen, unperturbed. She was, as he knew, not to be disconcerted by any novel social situation. She had witnessed so many situations, and such complicated ones, that the merely conventional were, in her eyes, relatively insignificant and irrelevant. There would be for her none of the debutante's sense of awkwardness or insufficiency. Again she reminded him of the rustic little princess, unaware of alien customs, and ready to learn and to laugh at her own blunders. It was arranged, Mrs. Talcott's appearance helping to decisions, that as soon as Karen heard from her guardian, who might have plans to suggest, she should come up to London and stay with Lady Jardine. Mrs. Talcott, on entering, had grasped Gregory's hand and shaken it vigorously, remarking, "I'm very pleased to see you back again." "I didn't tell Mrs. Talcott anything, Gregory," said Karen, "but I am sure she guessed." "Mrs. Talcott and I had our understandings," said Gregory, "but I'm sure she guessed from the moment she saw me down here. She was much quicker than you, Karen." "I've seen a good many young folks in my time," Mrs. Talcott conceded. Gregory's sense of the deepened significance in all things lent a special pathos to his conjectures to-day about Mrs. Talcott. He did not know how far her affection for Karen went, and whether it were more than the mere kindly solicitude of the aged for the young. But the girl's presence in her life must give at least interest and color, and after Mrs. Talcott had spoken her congratulations, and declared that she believed they'd be real happy together, he said, the idea striking him as an apt one, "And Mrs. Talcott, you must come up and stay with us in London sometimes, won't you?" "Oh, Mrs. Talcott, yes, yes," said Karen, delighted. He had never seen her kiss Mrs. Talcott, but she now clasped her arm, standing beside her. Mrs. Talcott did not smile, but after a moment the aspect of her face changed. It always took some moments for Mrs. Talcott's expression to change. Now it was like seeing the briny old piece of shipwrecked oak mildly illuminated with sunlight on its lonely beach. "That's real kind of you, real kind," said Mrs. Talcott reflectively. "I don't expect I'll get up there. I'm not much of a traveler these days, but it's real kind of you to have thought of it." "But it must be," Karen declared. "Only think, I should pour out your coffee for you in the morning, after all these years when you've poured out mine. Or we could walk in the park. Gregory's flat overlooks the park, you know. And we would drive in hansoms. Don't you like hansoms? And go to the play in the evening. But yes, indeed, you shall come." Mrs. Talcott listened to these projects, still with her mild illumination, remarking when Karen had done, "I guess not, Karen. I guess I'll stay here. I've been moving round considerable all my life long, and now I expect I'll just stay put. There's no one to look after things here but me, and they'd get pretty muddled if I was away, I expect. Mitchell isn't a very bright man." "The real difficulty is," said Karen, holding Mrs. Talcott's arm and looking at her with affectionate exasperation, "that she doesn't like to leave Les Solitudes, lest she should miss a moment of Tante. Tante sometimes turns up almost at a moment's notice. We shall have to get Tante safely away to Russia or America again before we can ask you. Isn't that the truth, Mrs. Talcott?" "Well, I don't know. Sometimes there's something in it," Mrs. Talcott admitted. "Mercedes likes to know I'm here seeing to things. She mightn't feel easy in her mind if I was away." "We'll lay it before her then," said Karen. "I know she will say that you must come." End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 14. It was not until some 3 weeks after that Karen paid her visit to London. Tante had not written at once, and Gregory had to control his discontent and impatience as best he might. He and Karen wrote to each other every day, and he was aware of a fretful anxiety in his letters which contrasted strangely with the serenity of hers. Once more she made him feel that she was the more mature. In his brooding imaginativeness he was like the most youthful of lovers, seeing his treasure menaced on every hand by the hazards of life. He warned Karen against cliff edges. He warned her, now that motors were every day becoming more common, against their sudden eruption in cornery lanes. He begged her repeatedly to keep safe and sound until he could himself take care of her. Karen replied with sober reassurances and promises, and showed no corresponding alarms on his behalf. She had evidently more confidence in the law of probability. She wired at last to say that she had heard from Tante and would come up next day if Lady Jardine would have her at such short notice. Gregory had made his arrangements with Betty, who showed a most charming sympathy for his situation, and when at the station he saw Karen's face smiling at him from a window, when he seized her arm and drew her forth, it was with a sense of relief and triumph as great as though she were restored to him after actual perils. "Darling, it has seemed such ages," he said. He was conscious, delighted, absorbedly, of everything about her, She wore her little straw hat with the black bow, and a long hooded cape of thin grey cloth. In her hand she held a small basket containing her knitting. She was knitting him a pair of golf stockings, and a book. He piloted her to the cab he had in waiting. Her one small shabby box was put on the top, and a very large dressing case, curiously contrasting in its battered and discoloured magnificence with the box, placed inside. It was a discarded one of Madame von Marwitz's, as its tarnished initials told him. It was only as the cab rolled out of the station, after he had kissed Karen and was holding her hand, that he realized that she was far less aware of him than he of her. Not that she was not glad. She sighed deeply with content, smiling at him, holding his hand closely. But there was a shadow of preoccupation on her. "Tell me, darling, is everything all right?" he asked. "You have had good news from your guardian?" She said nothing for a moment, looking out of the window and then back at him. Then she said, "She is beautiful to me, but I have made her sad." "Made her sad? Why have you made her sad?" Gregory suppressed, only just suppressed, an indignant note. "I did not think of it myself," said Karen. "I didn't think of her side at all, I'm afraid, because I did not realize how much I was to her. But you remember what I told you I was, the little home thing. I am that even more deeply than I had thought, and she feels, dear, dear one, that that is gone from her, that it can never be the same again." She turned her eyes from him, and the tears gathered thickly in them. "But dearest," said Gregory, "she can't want to make you sad, can she? She must really be glad to have you happy. She herself wanted you to get married, and had found Franz Lippheim for you, you know." Instinct warned him to go carefully. Karen shook her head with a little impatience. "One may be glad to have someone happy, yet sad for oneself. She is sad, very, very sad." "May I see her letter?" Gregory asked after a moment, and Karen, hesitating, then drew it from the pocket of her cloak, saying, as she handed it to him, and as if to atone for the impatience, "It doesn't make me love you any less. You understand that, dear Gregory, because she is sad. It only makes me feel, in my own happiness, how much I love her." Gregory read. The address was Bellevue. "My darling child, a week has passed since I had your letter, and now the second has come, and I must write to you. My Karen knows that when in pain it is my instinct to shut myself away, to be quite still, quite silent, and so to let the waves go over me. That is why, she will understand, I have not written yet. I have waited for the strength and courage to come back to me, so that I might look my sorrow in the face. For though it is joy for you, and I rejoice in it, it is sorrow, could it be otherwise, for me. So the years go on, and so our cherished flowers drop from us. So we feel our roots of life chilling and growing old. And the marriage veil that we wrap round a beloved child becomes a symbol of the shroud that is to fold us from her. I knew that I should one day have to give up my Karen. I wished it, she knows that. But now that it has come, and that the torch is in her hand, I can only feel the darkness in which her going leaves me. Not to find my little Karen there, in my life, part of my life, that is the thought that pierces me. In how many places have I found her, for years and years? Do you remember them all, Karen? I know that in heart we are not to be severed. I know that, as I cabled to you, you are not less, but more mine than ever. But the body cries out for the dear presence, for the warm little hand in my tired hand, the loving eyes in my sad eyes, the loving heart to lean my stricken heart upon. How shall I bear the loneliness and the silence of my life without you? Do not forget me, my Karen. Ah, I know you will not, yet the cry arises. Do not let this new love that has come to you in your youth and gladness shut me out more than it must. Do not forget the old, the lonely Tante. Ah, these poor tears, they fall and fall. I am sad, sad to death, my Karen. Great darknesses are behind me, and before me I see the darkness to which I go. Farewell, my darling. Labewohl. Tell Mr. Jardine that he must make my child happy indeed, if I am to forgive him for my loss. Yes, it shall be in July when I return. I send you a little gift that my Karen may make herself the fine lady, ready for all the gaieties of the new life. He will wish it to be a joyful one, I know. He will wish her to drink deep of all that the world has to offer of splendid and rare and noble. My child is worthy of a great life. I have equipped her for it. Go forward, my Karen, with your husband into the light. My heart is with you always. Tante. Gregory read, and instinctively, while he read, he glanced at Karen, studying his face lest she should guess from its tremor of contempt how latent antagonisms hardened to a more iconic dislike. But Karen gazed from the window, grave, preoccupied. Such suspicions were far indeed from her. Gregory could give himself to the letter and its intimations undiscovered. Suffering? Perhaps Madame von Marwitz was suffering, but she had no business to say it. Forgive him indeed. Well, if those were the terms of forgiveness, he promised himself that he should deserve it. Meanwhile he must conceal his resentment. "I'm so sorry, darling," he said, giving the letter back to Karen. "We shall have to cheer her up, shan't we? When she sees how very happy you are with me, I am sure she'll feel happier." He wasn't at all sure. "I don't know, Gregory. I am afraid that my happiness cannot make her less lonely." Karen's griefs were not to be lightly dispersed, but she was not a person to enlarge upon them. After another moment she pointed out something from the window and laughed, but the unshadowed gladness that he had imagined for their meeting was overcast. Betty awaited them with tea in her Pont Street drawing room, a room of polished, glittering, softly lustrous surfaces. Precious objects stood grouped on little Empire tables or ranged in Empire cabinets. Flat, firm cushions of rose-colored satin stood against the backs of Empire chairs and sofas. On the walls were French engravings and a delicate portrait of Betty, done at the time of her marriage by Beauté de Monvel. The room, like Betty herself, combined elegance and cordiality. "I was there, you know, at the very beginning," she said, taking Karen's hands and scanning her with her jewel-like eyes. "It was love at first sight. He asked who you were at once, and I'm pleased to think that it was I who gave him his first information. Now that I look back upon it," said Betty, taking her place at the tea table and holding Karen still with her bright and friendly gaze, "I remember that he was far more interested in you than in anything else that evening. I don't believe that Madame Okraska existed for him." Betty was drawing on her imagination in a manner that she took for granted to be pleasing. "I should be sorry to think that," Karen observed, and Gregory was relieved to see that she did not take Betty's supposition seriously. She watched her pretty hands move among the teacups with an air of pleased interest. "Would you really? I would want him to retain all his aesthetic faculties, even while he was falling in love?" "Do you think one could?" Betty asked her question smiling. "Or perhaps you think that one would fall in love the more securely from listening to Madame Okraska at the same time?" "I think perhaps I should. I do admire her so much. I hope now that some day I shall know her. She must be, I am sure, as lovely as she looks." "Yes, indeed," said Karen, "and you will meet her very soon, you see, for she comes back in July." Gregory sat and listened to their talk, satisfied that they were to get on, yet with a slight discomfort. Betty questioned and Karen replied, unaware that she revealed aspects of her past that Betty might not interpret as she would feel it natural that they should be interpreted, supremely unaware that any criticism could attach itself to her guardian as a result of these revelations. Yes, she had met so and this and that, in Rome, in Paris, in London or St. Petersburg. But no, evidently she could hardly say that she knew any of these people, friends of Tante's though they were. The ambiguity of her status as little camp follower became defined for Betty's penetrating and appraising eyes, and the inappropriateness of the letter, with its broken-hearted maternal tone, returned to Gregory with renewed irony. He didn't want to share it with Betty, his hidden animosities, and once or twice, When her eye glanced past Karen and rested reflectively upon himself, he knew that Betty was wondering how much he saw and how he liked it. The Lippheims again made their socially unillustrious appearance. Karen had so often stayed with them before Les Solitudes had been built, and while Tante travelled with Mrs. Talcott. She had never stayed, Gregory was thankful for small mercies, with the Belots. Tante, after all, had her own definite discriminations. She would not have placed Karen in the charge of Chantefoy's Lady of the Luxembourg, however reputable her present position. But Gregory was uneasy lest Karen should disclose how simply she took Madame Belot's past. The fact that Karen's opportunities in regard to dress were so obviously haphazard, coming up with the question of the trousseau, was somewhat atoned for by the sum that Madame von Marwitz now sent. Gregory had forgotten to ask the amount. £100, said Betty cheerfully. Oh yes, we can get you very nicely started on that. Tante seems to think, said Karen, that I shall have to be very gay and have a great many dresses, but I hope it will not have to be so very much. I am fond of quiet things. Well, especially at first, I suppose you will have a good many dinners and dances. Gregory is fond of dancing, you know. But I don't think you lead such a taxing social life, do you, Gregory? You are a rather sober person, aren't you? That is what I thought, said Karen, for I am sober too, and I want to read so many things, in the evening, you know, Gregory. I want to read political economy and understand about politics. Tante does not care for politics, but she always finds me too ignorant of the large social questions. You will teach me all that, won't you? And we must hear so much music, and travel too, in your holidays. I do not see how we can have much time for many dinners. As for dances, I do not know how to dance. Would that make any difference when you went? I could sit and look on, couldn't I? No, indeed, you can't sit and look on. You'll have to dance with me, said Gregory. I will teach you dancing as well as political economy. She must have lessons, mustn't she, Betty? Of course you must learn to dance. I do not think I shall learn easily, Karen said, smiling from him to Betty. I do not think I should do you credit in a ballroom. But I will try, of course. Gregory was quite prepared for Betty's probes when Karen went upstairs to her room. What a dear she is, Gregory, she said, and how clever it was of you to find her, hidden away as she has been. I suppose the life of a great musician doesn't admit of formalities. She never had time to introduce, as it were, her adopted daughter. Well, no, a great musician can hardly take an adopted or a real daughter around to dances, and Karen isn't exactly adopted. No, I see, Betty's eyes sounded him. She is really very nice, I suppose, Madame von Marwitz. You like her very much? Mrs. Forrester dotes upon her, of course, but Mrs. Forrester is an enthusiast. And I'm not, as you know, Gregory returned. He flattered himself with skill. I don't think that I shall ever dote on Madame von Marwitz. When I know her, I hope to like her very much. At present, I hardly know her better than you do. Ah, but you must know a great deal about her from Karen, said Betty, who would combine tact with pertinacity. But she too, in that respect, is an enthusiast, I suppose. Well, naturally, it's been a wonderful relationship. You remember you felt that so much in telling me about Karen at the very first. Of course, and it's all true, isn't it? The forest and all the rest of it. Only, not having met Karen, one didn't realize how much Madame von Marwitz was in luck. Betty, it was evident, had already begun to wonder whether Tante was as lovely as she looked. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 15. Dear Mrs. Forrester, you know that I worship the ground she treads on, said Mrs. Scrotton, but it can't be denied. Can you deny it? That Mercedes is capricious. It was one day only after Miss Scrotton's return from America, and she had returned alone, and it was to this fact that she alluded, rather than to the more general results of Madame von Marwitz's sudden postponement. Owing to the postponement, Karen to-day was being married in Cornwall without her guardian's presence. Mrs. Scrotton had touched on that. She had said that she didn't think Mercedes would like it. She had added that she couldn't herself, however inconvenient delay might have been, understand how Karen and Gregory could have done it. But she had not at first much conjecture to give to the bridal pair. It was upon the fact that Mercedes, at the last moment, had thrown all plans overboard, that she dwelt, with a nipped and tightened utterance and a gaze fixed upon the wall above the tea-table, almost tragic. Mrs. Forrester was the one person in whom she could confide. It was through Mrs. Forrester that she had met Mercedes. Her devotion to Mercedes constituted to Mrs. Forrester, as she was aware, her chief merit. Not that Mrs. Forrester wasn't fond of her. She had been fond of her ever since, as a relative of the Jardines, and a precociously intelligent little girl who had published a book on Port Royal at the age of 18, she had first attracted her attention at a literary tea-party. But Mrs. Forrester would not have sat so long, or listened so patiently, to any other theme than the one that so absorbed them both, and that so united them in their absorption. Mrs. Scrotton even suspected that a tinge of bland and kindly pity colored Mrs. Forrester's readiness to sympathize. She must know Mercedes well enough to know that she could give her devotees bad half-hours, though the galling thing was to suspect that Mrs. Forrester was one of the few people to whom she wouldn't give them. Mrs. Forrester might worship as devotedly as anybody, yet her devotion never let her in for so much forbearance and sacrifice. Perhaps, poor Miss Scrotton worked it out, the reason was that to Mrs. Forrester Mercedes was but one among many, whereas to herself Mercedes was the central prize and treasure. Mrs. Forrester was incapable of a pang of jealousy or emulation. She was always delighted, yet never eager. When in the first flow of intimacy with Mercedes, Miss Scrotton had actually imagined, for an ecstatic and solemn fortnight, that she stood first with her, Miss Forrester had met her air of irrepressible triumph with a geniality in which was no trace of grievance or humiliation. The downfall had been swift. Mercedes had snubbed her one day, delicately and accurately, in Mrs. Forrester's presence, and Miss Scrotton's cheek still burned when she remembered it. There were thus all sorts of unspoken things between her and Mrs. Forrester, and not the least of them was that her folly should have endeared her. Miss Scrotton at once chafed against and relied upon her old friend's magnanimity. Her intercourse with her was largely made up of a gloomy demand for sympathy and a stately evasion of it. Mrs. Forrester now poured her out a second cup of tea, answering soothingly, "Yes, she is capricious. But what do you expect, my dear Eleanor? She is a force of nature, above our little solidarities and laws. What do you expect? When one worships a force of nature, il faut subir son sort." It was kind of Mrs. Forrester to include herself in these submissions. "I had really built all my summer about the plans that we had made," Miss Scrotton said. "Mercedes was to have come back with me. I was to have stopped in Cornwall for Karen's marriage, and after my month here in London I was to have joined her at Les Solitudes for August. Now August is empty, and I had refused more than one very pleasant invitation in order to go to Mercedes. She isn't coming back for another 3 months." "You didn't care to go to the Aspreys, to the Adirondacks?" "How could I go, dear Miss Forrester, when I was full of engagements here in London for July? And moreover they didn't ask me. It is rather curious when one comes to think of it. I brought the Aspreys and Mercedes together. I gave her to them, one might say, but I am afraid I must own it. they seized her, and looked upon me as a useful rung in the ladder that reached her. It has been a disillusioning experience, I can't deny it. But passions for the Aspreys and their kind. The fact is," said Miss Scrotton, dropping her voice a little, "the real fact is, dear Miss Forrester, that the Aspreys aren't responsible. It wasn't for them she'd have stayed, and I think they must realize it. No, it is all Claude Drew. He is at the bottom of everything that I feel as strange and altered in Mercedes. He has an unholy influence over her. Oh, yes, I mean it, Mrs. Forrester. I have never seen Mercedes so swayed before." "Swayed?" Mrs. Forrester questioned. "Oh, but yes, indeed. He managed the whole thing, and when I think that he would, in all probability, never have seen the Ospreys if it had not been for me. Mercedes had him asked there, you know. They are very, but very, very fashionable people. They know everybody worth knowing all over the world. I needn't tell you that, of course, but it was all arranged, he and Mercedes, and Lady Rose, and the Marquis de Hautefeuille, and a young American couple, with the Ospreys in the background as universal providers. It made a little group where I was plainly de trop. Mr. Drew planned everything with her. She is to have her piano, and he is to write a book under her aegis. And they are to live in the pine woods with the most elaborate simplicity. However, I am sure the Adirondacks will soon bore her." "And how soon will Mr. Drew bore her?" asked Mrs. Forrester, who had listened to these rather pitiful revelations with, now and then, a slight elevation of her intelligent eyebrows. The question gave Miss Scrotton an opportunity for almost ominous emphasis. She paused over it, holding Mrs. Forrester with a brooding eye. "He won't bore her," she then brought out. "What? Never? Never?" Mrs. Forrester questioned gaily. "Never, never," Mrs. Scrotton repeated. "He is too clever. He will keep her interested and uncertain." "Well," Mrs. Forrester returned, as if this were all to the good, "it is a comfort to think that the poor darling has found a distraction." "You feel it that? I wish I could. I wish I could feel it anything but an infatuation. If only he weren't so much the type of a great woman's folly. If only he weren't so much of the region of whispers. It isn't like our wonderful Sir Alliston. One sees her there, standing high on a mountain peak, with the winds of heaven about her. To see her with Mr. Drew is like seeing her through some ambiguous, sticky fog. Oh, I can't deny that it has all made me very, very unhappy." Tears blinked in Mrs. Scrotton's eyes. Mrs. Forrester was kind. She leaned forward and patted Mrs. Scrotton's hand. She smiled reassuringly, and she refused, for a moment, to share her anxiety. "No, no, no," she said. "You are troubling yourself quite needlessly, my dear Eleanor. Mercedes is amusing herself, and the young man is an interesting young man. She has talked to me and written to me about him. And I think she needed distraction just now. I think this marriage of little Karen's has affected her a good deal. The child is, of course, connected in her mind with so much that is dear and tragic in the past." "Oh, Karen," said Mrs. Scrotton, who, drying her eyes, had accepted Mrs. Forrester's consolations with a slight sulkiness. "She hasn't given a thought to Karen, I can assure you." "No, you can't assure me, Eleanor," Mrs. Forrester returned, now with a touch of severity. "I don't think you quite understand how deep a bond of that sort can be for Mercedes, even if she seldom speaks of it. She has written to me very affectingly about it. I only hope she will not take it to heart that they could not wait for her. I could not blame them. Everything was arranged. A house in the Highlands, lent to them for the honeymoon." "Take it to heart? Dear me, no. She won't like it, probably, but that is a different matter." "Gregory is radiant, you know." "Is he?" said Mrs. Scrotton gloomily. "I wish I could feel radiant about that match, but I can't. I did hope that Gregory would marry well." "It isn't perhaps quite what one would have expected for him," Mrs. Forrester conceded, "but she is a dear girl. She behaved very prettily while she was here with Lady Jardine." "Did she? It is a very different marriage, isn't it, from the one that Mercedes had thought suitable? She told you, I suppose, about Franz Lippheim?" "Yes, I heard about that. Mercedes was a good deal disappointed. She is very much attached to the young man, and thought that Karen was too. I have never seen him. From what I've heard, he seemed to me as eminently suitable a husband for Karen as my poor Gregory is unsuitable. What he can have discovered in the girl I can't imagine. But I remember now how much interested in her he was on that day that he met her here at tea. She is such a dull girl," said Mrs. Scrotton sadly. "Such a heavy, clumsy person. And Gregory has so much wit and irony. It is very curious." "These things always are. Well, they are married now, and I wish them joy." "No one is at the wedding, I suppose, but old Mrs. Talcott. The next thing we shall hear will be that Sir Alliston has fallen in love with Mrs. Talcott," said Miss Scrotton, indulging her gloomy humour. "Oh yes, the Jardines went down, and Mrs. Morton. Mrs. Morton was a married sister of Gregory's. Lady Jardine has very much taken to the child, you know. They have given her a lovely little tiara." "Dear me," said Mrs. Scrotton, "it is a case of Cinderella. No, I can't rejoice over it, though. Of course I wish them joy. I wired to them this morning, and I'm sending them a very handsome paper cutter of dear father's. Gregory will appreciate that, I think. But no, I shall always be sorry that she didn't marry Franz Lippheim." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 16. The Jardines did not come back to London till October. They had spent a month in Scotland, and a month in Italy, and 2 weeks in France, returning by way of Paris, where Gregory passed through the ordeal of the Belots. He saw Madame Belot clasp Karen to her breast, and the long line of little Belots swarm up to be kissed successively. Monsieur Belot, a short, stout, ruddy man, with outstanding grey hair and a square grey beard, watching the scene benignantly, his palette on his thumb. Madame Belot didn't any longer suggest Chantefoy's picture. She suggested nothing artistic and everything domestic. From a wistful, Burne-Jones type with large eyes and a drooping mouth, she had relapsed to her plebeian origins, and now, fat, kind, cheerful, she was nothing but wife and mother, with a figure like a sack, and cheap tortoise-shell combs stuck, apparently at random, in the untidy bandeau of her hair. Following Karen and Monsieur Belot about the big studio, among canvases on easels and canvases leaned against the walls, Gregory felt himself rather bewildered, and not quite as he had expected to be bewildered. They might be impossible. Madame Belot, of course, was impossible, but they were not vulgar. And they were extremely intelligent, and their intelligence displayed itself in realms to which he was almost disconcertingly a stranger. Even Madame Belot, holding a stalwart, brown-fisted baby on her arm, could comment on her husband's work with a discerning aptness of phrase which made his own appreciation seem very trite and tentative. He might be putting up with the Belots, but it was quite as likely, he perceived, that they might be putting up with him. He realized, in this world of the Belots, the significance, the laboriousness, the high level of vitality, and he realized that to the Belots his own world was probably seen as a dull, half-useful, half-obstructive fact, significant mainly for its purchasing power. For its power of appreciation they had no respect at all. "Il radote, ma chérie," Monsieur Belot said to Karen of a famous person, now, after years of neglect, loudly acclaimed in London, at the moment when, by fellow artists, he was seen as defunct. "He no longer lives. He repeats himself. Ah, it is the peril, Monsieur Belot, turned kindly including eyes on Gregory. "If one is not born anew, continually, the artist dies. It becomes machinery." Karen was at home among the Belot standards. She talked with Belot of processes, methods, technique, the talk of artists, not artistic talk. "Et la grande Tante?" he asked her, when they were all seated at a nondescript meal about a long table of uncovered oak, the children unpleasantly clamorous, and Madame Belot dispensing, from one end, strange tepid tea, but excellent chocolate, while Belot, from the other, sent round plates of fruit and buttered rolls. Karen was laughing with la petite Margot, whom she held in her lap. "She is coming," said Karen, "at last. In 3 weeks I shall see her now. She has been spending the summer in America, you know, among the mountains." One of the boys inquired whether there were not danger to Madame von Marwitz from les peaux rouges, and when he was reassured, and the question of buffaloes disposed of, Madame Belot was able to make herself heard, informing Karen that the Lippheims, Franz, Frau Lippheim, Lotta, Minna, and Elizabeth, were to give 3 concerts in Paris that winter. "You have not seen them yet, Karen?" she asked. "They have not yet met Monsieur Jardine?" And when Karen said no, not yet, but that she had heard from Frau Lippheim that they were to come to London after Paris, Madame Belot suggested that the young couple might have time now to travel up to Leipzig and take the Lippheims by surprise. "Voilà de braves gens et de bons artistes," said Monsieur Belot. "You did like my dear Belots," Karen said, as she and Gregory drove away. She had, since her marriage, grown in perception. Gregory would have found it difficult now to hide ironies and antipathies from her. Even retrospectively, she saw things which at the time she had not seen, for instance, that the idea of the Belots had not been alluring to him. He knew, too, that she would have considered dislike of the Belots as showing defect in him, not in them, but cheerfully, if with a touch of her severity. She had an infinite tolerance for the defects and foibles of those she loved. He was glad to be able to reply with full sincerity, "Ils sont des braves gens et des bons artistes." "But," Karen said, looking closely at him and with a smile, "you would not care to pass your life with them, and you were quite disturbed lest I should say that I wanted to go and take the Lippheims by surprise at Leipzig. You like les gens du monde better than artists, Gregory." "What are you?" Gregory smiled back at her. "I like you better." "I? I am gens du monde manqué and artiste manqué. I am neither fish, flesh, nor fowl," said Karen. "I'm only, positively, my husband's wife and Tante's ward, and that quite satisfies me." He knew that it did. Their happiness was flawless. Flawless as far as her husband's wife was concerned. It was in regard to Tante's ward that Gregory was more and more conscious of keeping something from Karen, while more and more it grew difficult to keep anything from her. Already, if subconsciously, she must have become aware that her guardian's unabated mournfulness did not affect her husband as it did herself. She had showed him no more of Tante's letters, and they had been quite frequent. She had told him, while they were in Scotland, that it had hurt Tante very much that they should not have waited till her return. But she did not enlarge on the theme, and Gregory knew why. To enlarge would have been to reproach him. Karen had yielded, against her own wishes, to his entreaties. She had agreed that their marriage should not be postponed at the last minute. In his vehemence Gregory had been skilful. He had not said one word of reproach against Madame von Marwitz for her disconcerting change of plan. It was not surprising to him. It was what he had expected of Madame von Marwitz, that she would put Karen aside for a whim. Karen would not see her guardian's action in this light, yet she must know that her beloved was vulnerable to the charge, at all events, of inconsiderateness, and she had been grateful to him, no doubt, for showing no consciousness of it. She had consented, perhaps partly through gratitude, though she had felt her pledged word too as binding. Once she had consented, whatever the results, Gregory knew that she would not visit them on him. It was of her own responsibility that she was thinking when, with a grave face, she had told him of Tante's hurt. "After all, dearest," Gregory had ventured, "we did want her, didn't we? It was really she who chose not to come, wasn't it?" "I am sure that Tante wanted to see me married," said Karen, touching on her own hidden wound. He helped her there, knowing, in his guile, that to exonerate Tante was to help not only Karen but himself. "Of course, she doesn't think things out, does she? She is accustomed to having things arranged for her. I suppose she didn't a bit realize all that had been settled over here, nor what an impatient lover it was who had held you to your word." Her face cleared as he showed her that he recognized Tante's case as so explicable. "I'm so glad that you see it all," she said, "for you do. She is, oh, so unpractical, poor darling. She would forget everything, you know, unless I or Mrs. Talcott were there to keep reminding her, except her music, of course. But that is like breathing to her. And I am so sorry, so dreadfully sorry, because, of course, to know that she hurt me by not coming must hurt her more. But we will make it up to her. And oh, Gregory, only think, she says she may come and stay with us." One of her first exclamations on going over his flat with him was that they could put up Tante, if she would come. The drawing room could be devoted to her music, for there was ample room for the grand piano, which accompanied Madame von Marwitz as invariably as her toothbrush, and the spare bedroom had a dressing room attached that would do nicely for Louise. Now there seemed hope of this dream being realized. Karen had not yet received a wedding present from her guardian, but in Paris, on the homeward way, she heard that it had been dispatched from New York and would be awaiting her in London, and it was of this gift that she had been talking as she and Gregory drove from the station to St. James's on a warm October evening. Tante had not told her what the present was, but had written that Karen would care for it very much. "To find her present waiting for us is like having Tante to welcome us," Karen said. After her surmise about the present, she relapsed into happy musings, and Gregory, too, was silent, able only to give a side glance of gratitude, as it were, at the thought that Tante was to welcome them by proxy. His mood was one of almost tremulous elation. He was bringing her home after bridal wanderings that had never lost their element of dreamlike unreality. There had always been the feeling that he might wake any day to find Italy and Karen both equally illusory. But to see Karen in his home, taking her place in his accustomed life, would be to feel his joy linking itself securely with reality. The look of London at this sunny hour of late afternoon, and at this autumnal season, matched his consciousness of a tranquil metamorphosis. Idle still, and empty of its more vivid significance, one yet felt in it the soft stirrings of a re-entering tide of life. Cabs passed, piled with brightly badged luggage. The drowsily reminiscent shop windows showed here and there an adventurous forecast, and a house or two, among the rows of dumb, sleeping faces, opened wide eyes at the leisurely streets. The pale high pinks of the sky drooped and melted into the greys and whites and buffs below, and blurred the heavy greens of the park with falling veils of rose. The scene seemed drawn in flat, delicate tones of pastel. Karen sat beside him in the cab, and while she gazed before her, she had slipped her hand into his. She had preserved much of the look of the unmarried Karen in her dress. The difference was in the achievement of an ideal rather than in a change. The line of her little grey travelling hat above her brows was still unusual. With her grey gloves and long grey silken coat, she had an air, cool, confident, prepared for any emergency of travel. She would have looked equally appropriate, dozing under the hooded light in a railway carriage, taking her place at a table d'hôte in a provincial French town, or walking in the wind and sun along a foreign plage. After looking at the London to which he brought her, Gregory looked at her. Marriage had worked none of its even superficial disenchantments in him. After 3 months of intimacy, Karen still constantly arrested him with a sense of the undiscovered the unforeseen. What it consisted in he could not have defined. She was simple, even guileless, still she had no reticences, yet she seemed to express so much of what she was unaware that he felt himself to be continually making her acquaintance. That quiet slipping now of her hand into his, while her gaze maintained its calm detachment, the charm of her mingling tenderness and independence, had its vague sting for Gregory. She accepted him, and whatever he might mean, with something of the happy matter-of-fact with which she accepted all that was hers. She loved him with a completeness and selflessness that had made the world suddenly close round him with gentle arms. But Gregory often wondered if she were in love with him. Rapture, restlessness, and fear all seemed alien to her, and to turn from thoughts of her and of their love to Karen herself was like passing from dreams of poignant, starry ecstasy to a clear white dawn, with dew on the grass, and a lark rising, and the waking sweetness of a world at once poetical and practical about one. She strengthened and stilled his passion for her, and she seemed unaware of passion. They arrived at the great hive-like mansion, and in the lift, which took them almost to the top, Karen, standing near him, again put her hand in his and smiled at him. She was not feeling his tremor, but she was limpidly happy and as conscious as he of an epoch-making moment. Barker opened the door to them, murmuring a decorous welcome, and they went down the passage towards the drawing-room. They must at once inaugurate their homecoming, Gregory said, by going out on the balcony and looking at the view together. "I beg your pardon, sir," said Barker, who followed after them, "but I hope you and Mrs. Jardine will think it best what I've done with the large case, sir, that has come. I didn't know where you'd like it put, and it was a job getting it in anywhere. There wasn't room to leave it standing here." "Tante's present!" Karen exclaimed. "Oh, where is it?" "I had it put in the drawing room, ma'am," said Barker. "It made a hole in the wall, and knocked down 2 prints, sir. I'm very sorry, but there was no handling it conveniently." They turned down the next passage. The drawing room was at the end. Gregory threw open the door, and he and Karen paused upon the threshold. Standing in the middle of the room, high and dark against the half-obliterated windows, was a huge packing-case, an incredibly large packing-case. At first glance it had blotted out the room. The furniture, huddled in the corners, seemed to have drawn back from the apparition, scared and startled, and Gregory, in confronting it, felt an actual twinge of fear. The vast, unexpected form loomed to his imagination, for a moment, like a tidal wave rising terrifically in familiar surroundings, and poised in menace above him and his wife. He controlled an exclamation of dismay, and the ominous simile receded before a familiar indignation. That too he controlled. He could not say, "How stupid!" "Is it a piano?" Karen, after their long pause, asked in a hushed, tentative voice. "It's too high for a piano, darling," said Gregory, who had her arm in his, "and I have my little upright, you see. I can't imagine." "Shall I get the porter, sir, to help open it while you and Mrs. Jardine have tea?" Barker asked. "I laid tea in the dining room, ma'am." "Yes, let us have it opened at once," said Karen. "But I must be here when it is opened." She drew her arm from Gregory's and made the tour of the case. "It is probably something very fragile, and that is why it is packed in such a great box. It cannot itself be so big." "Barker will begin peeling off the outer husks while we get ready for tea, and we shall have plenty of time," said Gregory. "Get the porter up at once, Barker. I'm afraid your guardian has an exaggerated idea of the size of our domain, darling. The present looks as if only baronial halls could accommodate it." She glanced up at him while he led her to their room, and he knew that something in his voice struck her. He hadn't been able to control it, and it sounded like ill temper. Perhaps it was ill temper. It was with a feeling of relief and almost of escape that he shut the door of the room upon tidal waves and put his arms around his wife. "Darling," he said, "this is really it, at last, our homecoming." She returned his clasp and kiss with her frank, sweet fervour, though he saw in her eyes a slight bewilderment. He insisted, he had often during their travels been her maid, on taking off her hat and shoes, for her before going into his adjoining dressing room. Karen always protested, "It is so dear and foolish. I am so used to waiting on myself. I am so unused to being the fine idle lady." And she protested now, adding, as he knelt before her and putting her hand on his head, "And besides, I believe that in some ways I am stronger than you. It should not be you to take care of me." "Stronger? In what ways? Upon my word, madame," Gregory exclaimed, smiling up at her, "do you know that I was one of the best men of my time at Oxford?" "I don't mean in body, I mean in feelings, in nerves," said Karen. "It is more like Tante." He wondered, while in his little dressing room he splashed restoringly in hot water, what she quite did mean. Did she guess at the queer, morbid moment that had struck at his blissful mood? It was indeed disconcerting to have her find him like Tante. "Do you mind," said Karen, when he joined her again, smiling at him and clasping her hands in playful entreaty, "seeing at once what the present is, before we have tea? I do not know how I could eat tea while I had not seen it." "Mind? I'm eager to see it too," said Gregory, with a pang of self-reproach. "Of course we must wait tea." The porter in the passage was carrying away the outer boards of the packing case, and in the drawing room they found Barker, knee-deep in straw, ripping the heavy sacking covering that enveloped a much diminished but still enormous parcel. Gregory came to his aid. They drew forth fine shavings and unwrapped layers of paper, neatly secured. Slowly the core of the mystery disclosed itself in a temple-like form with a roof of dull black lacquer and dimly gilded inner walls, a thickly swathed figure wedged between them. The gift was, they now perceived, a Chinese Buddha in his shrine, and as Gregory and Barker disengaged the figure and laid it upon the ground, amusement, though still of an acrid sort, overcame Gregory's vexation. "A Buddha, upon my word," he said. "This is a gorgeous gift." Karen stooped to help unroll, as if from a mummy, the multitudinous bandages of fine paper. The passive bronze visage of the idol was revealed, and by degrees the seated figure ludicrously prone. They moved the temple to the end of the room, where 2 pictures were taken down and a sofa pushed away to make room for it. The Buddha was hoisted, with difficulty, onto its lotus, and there, dark on its glimmering background of gold, it sat and ambiguously blessed them. Karen had worked with them neatly and expeditionary, and in silence, and Gregory, glancing at her face from time to time, felt sure that she was adjusting herself to a mingled bewilderment and disappointment, to the wish also that she might be worthy of her new possession. She stood now before the Buddha and gazed at it. They had turned up the electric lights, but the curtains were not drawn, and the scent and light and vague diffused roar of London at this evening hour came in at the open windows. Barker, the porter, and the housemaid were carrying away the litter of paper and straw. The bright cheerful room, with its lovable banality and familiar comfort, smiled its welcome. And there in the midst the majestic and alien presence sat, overpowering and grotesque in its inappropriateness. Karen now turned her eyes on her husband and slightly smiled. "It is very wonderful," she said, "but I feel as if Tante expected a great deal of me in giving it to me, a great deal more than is in me. It ought to be a very deep and mystic person to have that Buddha." "Yes, it's a wonderful thing, quite awesome. Perhaps she expects you to become deep and mystic," said Gregory. "Please don't." "There is no danger of that," said Karen. "Of course it is the beauty of it and the strangeness that made Tante care for it. It is the sort of thing she would love to have herself." "Where on earth is he to go?" Gregory surmised. Yes, he might look well in that big music room at Les Solitudes, or in some vast hall where he would be more of an episode and less of a white elephant. "I hardly think he'll fit anywhere into the passage," he ventured. Karen had been looking from him to the Buddha. "But, Gregory, of course he must stay here," she said, "in the room we live in. Tante, I am sure, meant that." Her voice had a tremor. "I am sure it would hurt her dreadfully if we put him out of the way." Barker was now gone, and Gregory put his arm around her. But it makes all the room wrong, doesn't it? It will make us all wrong. That's what I rather feel. We aren't à la hauteur." He remembered, after speaking them, that these were the words he had used of his one colloquy with Madame von Marwitz. "I don't think," said Karen after a moment, "that you are quite kind." "Darling, I am only teasing you," said Gregory. "I'll like the thing if you want me to, and make offerings to him every morning. He looks in need of sacrifices and offerings, doesn't he? And what a queer oriental scent is in the air. Rather nice, that." "Please don't call it the thing," said Karen. He saw into her divided loyalty, and his comfort was to know that she didn't like the Buddha either. "I won't," he promised. "It isn't a thing, but a duty, a privilege, a responsibility. He shall stay here, where he is. He really won't crowd us to him possibly, and that sofa can go." "You see," said Karen, and tears now came to her eyes, "it would hurt her so dreadfully if she could dream that we did not love it very, very much." "I know," said Gregory, kissing her. "I perfectly understand. We will love it very, very much. Come now, you must be hungry. Let us have our tea." End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 17. Madame von Marwitz sat in the deep chintz sofa with Karen beside her, and while she talked to the young couple, Karen's hand in hers, her eyes continually went about the room with an expression that did not seem to match her alert, if rather mechanical, conversation. Karen had already seen her the day before when she had gone to the station to meet her and had driven with her to Mrs. Forrester's. But Miss Scrotton had been there too, almost tearful in her welcoming back of her great friend, and there had been little opportunity for talk in the carriage. Tante had smiled upon her deeply, had held her hand closely, and had asked, with the playful air which forestalls gratitude, how she liked her present. "You will see it, my Scrotton, a Buddha in his shrine, of the best period. A thing really rare and beautiful. Mr. Asprey told me of it at a sale in New York, and I was able to secure it." "Hein, ma petite, you were pleased?" "Oh, Tante, my letter told you that," said Karen. "And your husband, he was pleased?" "He thought it was gorgeous," said Karen, but after a momentary hesitation, not lost upon her guardian. "I was sorely tempted to keep it myself," said Madame von Marwitz. "I could see it in the music room at Les Solitudes. But at once I felt, it is Karen's. My only anxiety was for its background. I have never seen Mr. Jardine's flat, but I knew that I could trust the man my child had chosen to have beauty about him." "It isn't exactly a beautiful room," Karen confessed, smiling. "It isn't like the music room. You won't expect that from a London flat, or from us. But it is very bright and comfortable and, yes, pretty. I hope that you will like my home." Miss Scrotton, Karen felt, while she made these preparatory statements, had eyed her in a somewhat gaunt manner. But she was accustomed to a gaunt manner from Miss Scrotton, and Miss Scrotton's drawing room certainly was not as nice as Gregory's. Karen had not cared at all for its quality of earnest effort. Miss Scrotton, not many years ago, had been surrounded with art-tinted hangings and photographs from Rossetti, and the austerity of her 18th century reaction was now almost defiant. Her drawing room, in its arid chastity, challenged you, as it were, to dare remember the aesthetics of South Kensington. Karen did not feel that Gregory's drawing room required apologies, and Tante had been so mild and sweet, if also a little absent, that she trusted her to show leniency. She had as yet today said nothing about the Buddha or the background on which she found him. She talked to Gregory while they waited for tea, asking him a great many questions, not seeming always to listen to his answers. "Ah, yes, well done, bravo," she said at intervals, as she told her about their wedding trip, and how he and Karen had enjoyed this or that. When Barker brought in the tea tray and set it on a little table before Karen, she took up one of the cups. They were of an old English ware with a wreath of roses inside and lines of half obliterated gilt, and said, it was her first comment on the background, "Tiens, c'est joli. Is this one of your presents, Karen?" Karen told her that the tea set was not a present. It had belonged to a great-grandmother of Gregory's. Madame von Marwitz continued to examine the cup, and as she set it down among the others, with a deliberate nicety of gesture that gave at once power and grace to her slightest movement, she said, "You were fortunate in your great-grandmother, Mr. Jardine." Her voice, her glance, her gestures were already affecting Gregory unpleasantly. There was in them a quality of considered control, as though she recognized difficulty and were gently and warily evading it. Sitting on his chintz sofa in the bright burnished room, all in white, with a white lace headdress, half veil, half turban, binding her hair and falling on her shoulders, she made him think, in her inappropriateness and splendour, of her own Buddha, who, in his glimmering shrine, lifted his hand, as if in a gesture of bland exorcism, before which the mirage of a vulgar and trivial age must presently fade away. The Buddha looked permanent, and the room looked transient. The only thing in it that could stand up against him, as it were, was Karen. To her husband's eye, newly aware of aesthetic discriminations, Karen seemed to interpret and justify her surroundings, to show their commonplace as part of their charm, and to make the Buddha and Madame von Marwitz herself, in all their portentous distinction, look like incidental ornaments. Madame von Marwitz's silence in regard to the Buddha had already become a blight, but it was, perhaps, the growing crisp decision in Gregory's manner that made Karen first aware of constraint. Her eyes then turned from Tante to the shrine at the end of the room, and she said, "You don't care for the way it looks here, Tante, do you? Your present?" Madame von Marwitz had finished her tea, and she turned in the sofa so that she could consider the Buddha no longer incidentally but decisively. "I am glad that it is yours, ma chérie," she said, after the pause of her contemplation. "Some day you must place it more happily. You don't intend, do you, Mr. Jardine, to live for any length of time in these rooms?" "Oh, but I like it here so much, Tante," Karen took upon herself the reply. "I want to go on living where Gregory has lived for so long. We have such a view, you see, and such air." Madame von Marwitz mused upon her for a moment, and then giving her chin a little pinch, half meditative, half caressing, she inquired, with continental frankness, "A very pretty sentiment, ma petite, but what will you do when the babies come?" Karen was not disconcerted. "I rather hope we may not have babies for a year or two, Tante, and when they do come there will be room quite happily for several. You don't know how big the flat is. You will see. Gregory has always been able to put up his married sister and her husband. That gives us one quite big room over and a small one." "But then you can have no friends if your rooms are full of babies," Madame von Marwitz objected, still with mild playfulness. "No," Karen had to admit it, "but while they were very small I do not think I should have much time for friends in the house, should I? And we think, Gregory and I, of soon taking a tiny cottage in the country too." "Then, while you remain here, and unless my Buddha is to look very foolish," said Madame von Marwitz, "you must, I think, change your drawing room. It can be changed." She gazed about her with a touch of wildness. "Something could be done. It could be darkened, quieted. It talks too much and too loudly now, does it not? But you could move these so large chairs and couches away and have sober furniture of a good period. One can still pick up good things if one is clever. A Chinese screen here and there, a fine old mirror, a touch of splendour, a flavour of dignity. The shape of the room is not impossible. The outlook, as you say, gives space and breathing. Something could be done." Karen's gaze followed hers, cogitating but not acquiescent. "But you see, Tante," she remarked, "these are things that Gregory has lived with. and I like them too. I should not like them changed." "But they are not things that you have lived with, parbleu," said Madame von Marwitz, laughing gently. "It is a pretty sentiment, ma petite. It does you honour. You are, but oh, so deeply, the wife, already, are you not, my Karen? But I am sure that your husband will not wish you to sacrifice your taste to your devotion. Young men, many of them do not care for these domestic matters, do not see them. My Karen must not pretend to me that she does not care and see. I am right, am I not, Mr. Jardine? You would not wish to deprive Karen of the bride's distinctive pleasure, the furnishing of her own nest." Gregory's eyes met hers. It seemed to be their second long encounter. Eyes like jewels, these of Madame von Marwitz, full of intense life, intense colour, still, bright and cold, tragically cold. He seemed to see suddenly that all the face, the long eyebrows with the plaintive ripple of irregularity bending their line, the languid lips, the mournful eyelids, the soft contours of cheek and throat, were a veil for the coldness of her eyes. To look into them was like coming suddenly through dusky woods to a lonely mountain tarn, lying fathomless and icy beneath a moonlit sky. Gregory was aware, as if newly and more strongly than before, of how ambiguous was her beauty, how sinister her coldness. Above the depths where these impressions were received was his consciousness that he must be careful if Karen were not to guess how much he was disliking her guardian. It was not difficult for him to smile at a person he disliked, but it was difficult not to smile sardonically. This was an apparently trivial occasion on which to feel that it was a contest that she had inaugurated between them, but he did feel it. "Karen knows that she can burn everything in the room as far as I'm concerned," he said. "Even your Buddha," he added, smiling a little more nonchalantly. "I'd gladly sacrifice if it gave her pleasure." Nothing was lost upon Madame von Marwitz, of that he was convinced. She saw, perhaps, further than he did, for he did not see nor wish to, beyond the moment of guarded hostility. And it was with the utmost gentleness and precaution, with, indeed, the air of one who draws softly aside from a sleeping viper found upon the path, that she answered, "I trust, indeed, that it may never be my Karen's pleasure, or yours, Mr. Jardine, to destroy what is precious. That would hurt me very much. And now, child, may I not see the rest of this beloved domain?" She turned from him to Karen. Gregory rose. He had told Karen that he would leave them alone after tea. He had letters to write, and he would see Madame von Marwitz before she went. He had the sense, as he closed the door, of flying before temptation. What might he not say to Madame von Marwitz if he saw too much of her? When she and Karen were left alone, Madame von Marwitz's expression changed. The veils of lightness fell away. Her face became profoundly melancholy. She gazed in silence at Karen, and then held out her arms to her. Karen came closer and was enfolded in their embrace. My child," said Madame von Marwitz, leaning, as was her wont at these moments, her forehead against Karen's cheek. "Dear Tante," said Karen. "You are not sad," she murmured. "Sad?" her guardian repeated after a moment. "Am I ever anything but sad? But it is not of my sadness that I wish to speak. It is of you. Are you happy, my dear one?" "Oh, Tante, so happy, so very happy, more than I can say." "Is it so?" Madame von Marwitz lifted her head and stroked back the girl's hair. "Is it so, indeed? He loves you very much, Karen?" "Oh, yes, Tante." "It is a great love? Selfless? Passionate?" "It is a love worthy of my child?" "Yes, indeed." A slight austerity was now apparent in Karen's tone. Silence fell between them for a moment, and then, stroking again the golden head, Madame von Marwitz continued, with great tenderness, "It is well. It is what I have prayed for my child. And let me not cast one shadow, even of memory, upon your happiness. Yet, Karen, if you could have let me share in the sunshine a little, if you could have remembered how dark was my way, how lonely, that my child should have married without me. It hurts. it hurts." She did not wish to cast a shadow, yet she was weeping, the silent, undisfigured weeping that Karen knew so well, showing only in the slow welling of tears from darkened eyes. "Oh, Tante," Karen now leaned her head to her guardian's shoulder, "I did not dream you would mind so much. It was so difficult to know what to do. Have I shown myself so indifferent to you in the past, my Karen, that you should have thought I would not mind?" "I do not mean that, Tante. I thought that you would feel that it was what it was best for me to do. I had given my word. All the plans were made." "You had given your word? Would he not have let you put me before your word, for once, for that one time in all our lives?" "It was not that, Tante. Gregory would have done what I wished. You must not think that I was forced in any way." Karen now had raised her head. "But we had waited for you. We thought that you were coming. It was only at the last moment that you let us know, Tante, and you did not even say when you were coming back." Madame von Marwitz kept silence for some moments after this, savouring perhaps in the words, though Karen's eyes, in speaking them, had also filled with tears, some hint of resistance. She looked away from the girl, keeping her hand in hers, as she said, "I could not come. I could not tell you when I was to come. There were reasons that bound me, ties, claims, a tangle of troubled human lives, the threads passing through my fingers. No, I was not free, and there I would have had you trust me. No, no, my Karen, we will speak of it no farther. I understand young hearts, they are forgetful, they cannot dwell on the shadowed places. Let us put it aside, the great grief. What surprises me is to find that the littlest ones cling so closely. I am foolish, Karen. I have had much to bear lately, and I cannot shake off the little griefs. That others than myself should have chosen my child's trousseau. Oh, it is small, so very small a thing, yet it hurts, that the joy of seeking all the pretty clothes together, that too should have been taken from me. Do not weep, child." "Tante, you could not come, and the things had to be made ready. They all, Mrs. Forrester, Betty, seemed to feel there was no time to lose. And I have always chosen my own clothes. I did not know that you would feel this so." "Betty? Who is Betty?" Madame von Marwitz mournfully yet alertly inquired. "Lady Jardine, Gregory's sister-in-law. You remember, Tante, I have written of her. She has been so kind." "Betty," Madame von Marwitz repeated, sadly. "Yes, I remember. She was at your wedding, I think. There, dry your eyes, child. I understand. It is a loving heart, but it forgot. The sad old Tante was crowded out by new friends, new joys." "No, you must not say that, Tante. It is not true." The hardness that Madame von Marwitz knew how to interpret was showing itself on Karen's face, despite the tears. Her guardian rose, passing her arm around her shoulders. "It is not true then, chérie. When one is very sad one is foolish. Ah, I know it. One imagines too quickly things that are not true. They float and then they cling like the tiny barbed down of the thistle, and then behold one's brain is choked with thorny weeds. That is how it comes, my Karen. Forgive me. There, kiss me." "Darling Tante," Karen murmured, clasping her closely. "Nothing crowded you out. Nothing could ever crowd you out. Say that you believe me. Say that all the thistles are rooted up and thrown away." "Rooted up and burned root and branch, my child. I promise it. I trust my child. She is mine, my loving one. Ainsi soit-il." "And now," Madame von Marwitz spoke with sudden gaiety, "and now show me your home, my Karen. Show me all over this home of yours, to which already you are so attached. Ah, it is a child in love." They went from room to room, their arms around each other's waists. Madame von Marwitz cast her spell over Mrs. Barker in the kitchen, and smiled a long smile upon Rose, the housemaid. "Yes, yes, very nice, very pretty," she said in the spare room, the little dressing room, the dining room and kitchen. In Karen's room, with its rose-budded chintz and many photographs of herself, of Gregory, she paused and looked about. "Very, very pretty," she repeated. You like bedsteads of brass, my Karen?" "Yes, Tante, they look so clean and bright." "So clean and bright. I do not think that I could sleep in brass," Madame von Marwitz mused, "but it is a simple child." "Yes, that is just it, Tante," said Karen smiling, "and I want to explain to you about the drawing room. You see it is that. I am simple, not a sea anemone of taste like you. I quite well see things. I see that Les Solitudes is beautiful, and that this is not like Les Solitudes. Yet I like it here just as it is. Because it is his. Is it not so, my child in love? Ah, she must not be teased. You can be happy then, among so much brass, so many things that glitter and are highly colored. Yes, indeed, and it is a pretty bedroom, Tante. You must say that it is a pretty bedroom." "Is it? Must I? Pretty? Yes, no doubt it is pretty. Yet I could have wished that my Karen's nest had more distinction, expressed a finer sense of personality. I imagine that every young woman in this vast beehive of homes has just such a bedroom." "You think so, Tante? I am afraid that if you think this like everybody's room, you will find Gregory's library even worse. You must see that now. It is all that you have not seen." Karen took her last bull by the horns, leading her out. "Has it red wallpaper, ceiling wax red, with racing prints on the walls and a very large photograph over the mantelpiece of a rowing crew at Oxford?" Madame von Marwitz questioned with a mixture of roguishness and resignation. "Yes, yes, you wicked Tante. How did you know?" "I know, I see it," said Madame von Marwitz, "but a man's room expresses a man's past. One cannot complain of that." They went to the library. Madame von Marwitz had described it with singular accuracy. Gregory rose from his letters, and his eyes went from her face to Karen's, both showing their traces of tears. "It is au revoir, then," said Madame von Marwitz, standing before him, her arm round Karen's shoulders. "I am happy in my child's happiness, Mr. Jardine. You have made her happy, and I thank you. You will lend her to me sometimes? You will be generous with me and let me see her?" "Of course, whenever you want to, whenever she wants to," said Gregory, leaning his hands on the back of his chair and tilting it a little while he smiled the fullest acquiescence. Madame von Marwitz's eyes brooded on him. "That is kind," she said gently. "Oh, no, it isn't," Gregory returned. "I think," said Madame von Marwitz, becoming even more gentle, "that you misunderstand my meaning. When people love, it is hard sometimes not to be selfish in the joy of love, and the lesser claims tend to be forgotten. I only ask that you should make it easy for Karen to come to me." To this Gregory did not reply. He continued to tilt his chair and to smile at Madame von Marwitz. "This husband of yours, Karen," said Madame von Marwitz, "does not understand me yet. You must interpret me to him. Adieu, Mr. Jardine. Will you come with me alone to the door, Karen? It is our first farewell in a home I do not give you." She gave Gregory her hand. They left him and went down the passage together. Madame von Marwitz kept her arm around the girl's shoulders, but its grasp had tightened. "My child, my own child," she murmured, as, at the door, she turned and clasped her. Her voice strove with deep emotion. "Dear, dear Tante," said Karen, also with a faltering voice. Madame von Marwitz achieved an uncertain smile. "Farewell, my dear one. I bless you. My blessing be upon you." Then on the threshold she paused. "Try to make your husband like me a little, my Karen," she said. Karen did not come back to him in the smoking room, and Gregory presently got up and went to look for her. He found her in the drawing room, sitting in the twilight, her elbow on her knee, her chin in her hand. He did not know what she could be feeling. The fact that dominated in his own mind was that her guardian had made her weep. "Well, darling," he said. He stooped over her and put his hand on her shoulder. The face she lifted to him was ambiguous. She had not wept again. On the contrary, he felt sure that she had been intently thinking. The result of her thought now was a look of resolute serenity. But he was sure that she did not feel serene. For the first time Karen was hiding her feeling from him. "Well, darling," she replied. She got up and put her arms around his neck. She looked at him, smiling calmly. Then, as if struck by a sudden memory, she said: "It is the night of the dance, Gregory." They were to dine at Edith Morton's and go on to Karen's first dance. Under Betty's supervision she had already made progress through half a dozen lessons, though she had not, she confessed to Gregory, greatly distinguished herself at them. "I'll get you round all right," he had promised her. They looked forward to the dance. "So it is," said Gregory. "It is not time to dress yet, is it?" "It's only 6:30. Shall I wear my white silk, Gregory, with the little white rose wreath?" "Yes, and the nice little square-toed white silk shoes, like a Reynolds lady's, and like nobody else's. I do so like your square toes." "I cannot bear pinched toes," said Karen. "My father gave me a horror of that, and Tante. Her feet are as perfect as her hands. She has all her shoes made for her by a wonderful old man in Vienna, who is an artist in shoes. She was looking well, wasn't she, Tante?" Karen added in even tones. Gregory and she were sitting now on the sofa together, their arms linked and hand in hand. "Beautiful," said Gregory with sincerity. "How well that odd head dress became her." "Didn't it? It was nice that she liked those pretty teacups, wasn't it? And appreciated our view, even though," Karen smiled, taking now another bull by the horns, "she was so hard on our flat. I'm afraid she feels her Buddha and travesti here." "Well, he is, of course. I do hope," said Gregory, also seizing his bull, "that she didn't think me rude in my joke about being willing to burn him. And you will change everything, burn anything, barring the Buddha and the teacups, that you want to, won't you, dear?" "No, I wouldn't even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. Perhaps Tante did not quite understand. I think it may take a little time for her to understand your jokes, or you her outspokenness. She is like a child in her candour about the things she likes or dislikes." A fuller ease had come into her voice. By her brave pretence that all was well, she was persuading herself that all could be made well. Perhaps it might be, thought Gregory, if only he could go on keeping his temper with Madame von Marwitz, and if Karen, wise and courageous darling, could accept the unspoken between them, and spare him definitions and declarations. A situation undefined is so often a situation saved. Life grows over and around it. It becomes a mere mummied fly, preserved in amber, unsightly perhaps, but unpernicious. After all, he told himself, and he went on thinking over the incidents of the afternoon while he dressed, after all, Madame von Marwitz might not be much in London. She was a comet, and her course would lead her streaming all over the world for the greater part of her time. And above all and mercifully, Madame von Marwitz was not a person upon whose affections one would have to count. He seemed to have found out all sorts of things about her this afternoon. He could have given sergeant points. The main strength of her feeling for anyone, deep instinct told him, was an insatiable demand that they should feel sufficiently for her. And the chief difficulty, he refused to dignify it by the name of danger, was that Madame von Marwitz had her deep instincts too, and had no doubt found out all sorts of things about him. He did not like her. He had not liked her from the first, and she could hardly fail to feel that he liked her less and less. He was able to do Madame von Marwitz justice. Even a selflessly devoted mother could hardly rejoice wholeheartedly in the marriage of a daughter to a man who disliked herself, and how much less could Madame von Marwitz, who was not a mother and not selflessly devoted to anybody, rejoice in Karen's marriage. She was right in feeling that it menaced her own position. He did her justice. He made every allowance for her. He intended to be straight with her. But the fact that stood out for Gregory was that, already, she was not straight with him. Already she was picking surreptitiously, craftily at his life, and this was to pick at Karen's. He would give her a long string and make every allowance for the vexations of her situation, but if she began seriously to tarnish Karen's happiness, he would have to pull the string smartly. The difficulty, he refused to see this as danger either, was that he could not pull the string upon Madame von Marwitz without, by the same gesture, upsetting himself as well. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 18. The unspoken, for the first month or so of Madame von Marwitz's return, remained accepted. There were no declarations and no definitions, and Gregory's immunity was founded on something more reassuring than the mere fact that Madame von Marwitz frequently went away. When she was in London, it became apparent he was to see very little of her, and as long as they did not meet too often, he felt that he was, in so far, safe. Madame von Marwitz was tremendously busy. She paid many week-end visits. She sat to Ballot, who had come to London to paint it, for a great portrait. She was to give 3 concerts in London during the winter, and 2 in Paris, and it was natural enough that she had not found time to come to the flat again. But although Gregory saw so little of her, although she was not in his life as a presence, he felt her in it as an influence. She might have been the invisible but portentous comet moving majestically on the far confines of his solar system. And one accounted for oddities of behavior in the visible planets by inferring that the comet was the cause of them. If he saw very little of Madame von Marwitz, he saw, too, much less of his twin planet Charon. It was not so much that Charon's course was odd as that it was altered. If Madame von Marwitz sent for her very intermittently, she had, all the same, in all her life, as she told Gregory, never seen so much of her guardian. She frankly displayed to him the radiance of her state, wishing him, as he guessed, to share to the full every detail of her privileges, and to realize to the full her gratitude to him for proving so conclusively to Tante that there was none of the selfishness of love in him. Tante must see that he made it very easy for her to go to her, and Gregory derived his own secret satisfaction from the thought that Charon's radiance was the best of retorts to Madame von Marwitz's veiled intimations. As long as she made Charon happy and let him alone, he seemed to himself to tell her he would get on very well, and he suspected that her clutch of Charon would soon loosen when she found it unchallenged. In the meantime, there was not much satisfaction for him elsewhere. Charon's altered course left him often lonely. Not only had the readings of political economy, begun with so much ardor in their spare evenings, almost lapsed for lack of consecutiveness, but he frequently found on coming home, tired for his tea and eager for the sight of his wife, a little note from her telling him that she had been summoned to Mrs. Forrester's, as Tante was with Fafner in his cave, and wanted her. Fafner was the name that Madame von Marwitz gave to her moods of sometimes tragic and sometimes petulant melancholy. Charon had told him all about Fafner, and how in the cave Tante would lie sometimes for long hours, silent, her eyes closed, holding her hand, sometimes asking her to read to her English, French, German, or Italian poetry. Their range of reading always astonished Gregory. He gathered, too, from Charon's confidences how little, until now, he had gauged the variety of the great woman's resources, how little done justice to her capacity for being merely delightful. She could be whimsically gay in the midst of melancholy, and her jests and merriment were the more touching, the more exquisite, from the fact that they flowered upon the dark background of the cave. It was, he saw, with a richer flavor, that Charon tasted again the charm of old days, when, after some great musical or social event, in which the girl had played her part of contented observer, they had laughed together over follies and appreciated qualities, in the familiar language of allusion, evolved from long community in experience. Charon repeated to him Tante's sallies at the expense of this or that person, and the phrase with which she introduced these transformations of human foolishness to the service of comedy. "Come, let us make meringues of them." The dull or ludicrous creatures, so to be whipped up and baked crisp, revealed in the light of the analogy the tempting vacuity of a bowl of white of egg. When Tante introduced her wit into the colourless substance, she frothed it to a sparkling work of art. Gregory was aware sometimes of a pang as he listened. He and Karen had, indeed, their many little jokes, and their stock of common association was growing, but there was nothing like the range of reference, nothing like the variety of experience, that her life with Madame von Marwitz had given her to draw upon. It was to her companionship, intermittent as it had been, with the world-wandering genius, that she owed the security of judgment that often amused, yet often disconcerted him, the catholicity of taste, besides which, though he would not acknowledge its final validity, he felt his own taste to be sometimes narrow and sometimes guileless. He saw that Karen had every ground for feeling her own point of view a larger one than his. It was no personal complacency that her assurance expressed, but the modest recognition of privilege. Beyond their personal tie, so her whole demeanour showed him, he had nothing to add to her highly dowered life. Gregory had known that his world would mean nothing to Karen, yet when, under Betty's guidance, she fulfilled her social duties, dined out, gave dinners, received and returned visits, the very compliance of her indifference, while always amusing, vexed him a little, and a little alarmed him too. He had known that he would have to make all the adjustments, but how adjust oneself to a permanent separation between one's private and one's social life? Old ties, lacking new elements of growth, tended to become formalities. When Karen was not there, he did not care to go without her to see people, and when she was with him, the very charm of her personality was a barrier between him and them. His life became narrower as well as lonelier. There was nothing much to be done with people to whom one's wife was indifferent. It was very obvious to him that she found the sober, conventional people who were his friends very flavourless, especially when she came to them from Fafner's Cave. He had always taken his friends for granted as part of the pleasant routine of life, like one's breakfast or one's bath. But now, seeing them anew, through Karen's eyes, he was inclined more and more to believe that they weren't as dull as she found them. She lacked the fundamental experience of a rooted life. She was yet to learn, he hoped, he determined she should learn, that a social system of harmonious people, significant, perhaps, more because of their places in a system than as units, and bound together by a highly evolved code, was, when all was said and done, a more satisfactory place in which to spend one's life than an archaic world of erratic, undisciplined, independent individuals. Karen, however, did not understand the use of the system, and she saw its members with eyes as clear to their defects as were Gregory's to the defects of Madame von Marwitz. Gregory's friends belonged to that orderly and efficient section of the nation that moves contentedly between the simply professional and the ultra-fashionable. They had a great many duties, social, political, and domestic, which they took with a pleasant seriousness, and a great many pleasures which they took seriously too. They came up from the quiet responsibilities of the countryside for a season, and did the concerts and exhibitions as they did their shopping and their balls. Art to most of them was a thing accepted on authority, like the latest cut for sleeves or the latest fashion for dressing the hair. A few of them, like the Cornish Lavingtons, had never heard Madame Okraska. A great many of them had never heard of Belot. The Madame Okraskas and the Belots of the world were to them a queer, alien people, regarded with only a mild, derivative interest. They recognized the artist as a decorative appurtenance of civilized life, very much as they recognized the dentist or the undertaker as its convenient appurtenances. It still struck them as rather strange that one should meet artists socially, and perhaps as rather regrettable, their traditional standard of good faith requiring that the people one met socially should, on the whole, be people whom one wouldn't mind one's sons and daughters marrying. And they didn't conceive of artists as entering that category. Gregory, with all his acuteness, did not gauge the astonishment with which Karen came to realize these standards of his world. Her cheerful evenness of demeanor was a cloak, sometimes for indignation and sometimes for mirth. She could only face the fact that this world must, in a sense, be hers, by relegating it and all that it meant to the merest background in their lives. Her real life consisted in Gregory, in Tante. All that she had to do with these people, oh, so nice and kind they were, she saw that well, but oh, so stupid, most of them, so inconceivably blind to everything of value in life. All that she had to do was, from time to time, to open their box, their well-padded, well-provendered box, and look at them pleasantly. She felt sure that for Gregory's sake, if not for theirs, she should always be able to look pleasantly. Unless she had been afraid of this sometimes, they should say or do things that in their blindness struck at Tante, and at the realities that Tante stood for. But all had gone so well, so Karen believed, that she felt no misgivings when Tante expressed a wish to look into the box with her, and said, "You must give a little dinner party for me, my Karen, so that I may see your new milieu." Gregory controlled a dry little grimace when Karen reported this speech to him. He couldn't but suspect Tante's motives in wanting them to give a little dinner party for her, but he feigned the most genial interest in the plan, and agreed with Karen that they must ask their very nicest to meet Tante. Betty had helped Karen with all her dinners. She had seen as yet very little of the great woman, and entered fully into Karen's eagerness that everything should be very nice. "Gregory will take her in," said Betty, "and we'll put Bertram Fraser on her other side. He's always delightful. And we'll have the Canning Thompsons, and the Overtons, and the Byngs. The Byngs are so decorative." Constance Armitage was now Mrs. Byng. "And my dear old General," said Karen, sitting at her desk with a paper on her knee and an obedient pencil in her hand. "I forget his name, but we met him at the dinner that you gave after we married. You know, Betty, with the thin russet face and the little blue eyes. May he take me in?" "General Montgomery, yes, that is a good idea. Glorious old man. Though Lady Montgomery is rather a stodge," said Betty. "But Oliver can have her. I remember a sleek small head like a turtle, with salmon pink feathers on it. Poor Oliver, will he mind?" "Not a bit. He never minds anything but the dinner, and with Mrs. Barker we can trust to that." "Tante often likes soldiers," said Karen, pleased with her good idea. "Our flags, she says, they are, and that the world would be drab coloured without them." So it was arranged. Bertram Fraser was an old family friend of the Jardines. His father was still the rector of their Northumberland parish, and he and Gregory and Oliver had hunted and fished and shot and gone to Oxford together. Bertram had been a traveller in strange countries since those days, had written one or two clever books, and was now in Parliament. The Overtons, also country neighbours, were fond of music as well as of hunting, and Mr. Canning Thompson was an eminent, if rather ponderous, Q.C., for whose wife, the gentle and emaciated Lady Mary, Gregory had a special affection. She was a great philanthropist and a patient student of early Italian art, and he and she talked gardens and pictures together. Betty and Oliver were the first to arrive on the festal night. Betty's efficiency, expressed by all her diamonds, and a dress of rose-coloured velvet, making up for whatever there might be of inefficiency in Karen's appearance and deportment. Karen was still, touchingly so to her husband's eyes, the little Hans Andersen heroine in appearance. She wore tonight the white silk dress and the wreath of little white roses. Oliver and Gregory chatted desultorily until the Byngs arrived. Oliver was fair and ruddy, and his air of dozing contentment was always vexatious to his younger brother. He had every reason for contentment. Betty's money had securely buttressed the family's fortunes, and he had 3 delightful little boys to buttress Betty's money. Gregory grew a little out of temper after talking for 5 minutes to Oliver, and this was not a fortunate mood in which to realize, as the Montgomerys, the Overtons, and the Canning Thompsons followed the Byngs at 8:15, that Madame von Marwitz was probably going to be late. At 8:30, Karen, looking at him with some anxiety expressed in her raised brows, silently conveyed to him her fear that the soup, at the very least, would be spoiled. At 8:40 Betty murmured to Karen that they perhaps better begin without Madame von Marwitz, hadn't they? She must, for some reason, be unable to come. Dinner was for 8. "Oh, but we must wait longer," said Karen. She would have telephoned, or Mrs. Forrester would, if she had not been coming. Tante is always late. But always, always, she added, without condemnation, if with anxiety. And there is the bell now. Yes, I heard it. It was 8:45 when Madame von Marwitz, with Karen, who had hastened out to meet her, following behind, appeared at last, benign and unperturbed as a moon sliding from clouds. In the doorway she made her accustomed pause, the pause of one not surveying her audience, but indulgently allowing her audience to survey her. It was the attitude in which Belot was painting his great portrait of her. But it was not met tonight by the eyes to which she was accustomed. The hungry guests looked at Madame von Marwitz with austere relief, and looked only long enough to satisfy themselves that her appearance really meant dinner. Gregory led the way with her into the dining room, and suspected in her air of absent musing a certain discomfiture. She was, as usual, strangely and beautifully attired, as though for the operatic stage rather than for a dinner party. Strings of pearls fell from either side of her head to her shoulders, and a wide tiara of pearls banded her forehead in a manner recalling a Russian headdress. She looked, though so lovely, also so conspicuous, that there was a certain ludicrousness in her appearance. It apparently displeased or surprised Lady Montgomery, who, on Gregory's other hand, her head adorned with the salmon pink ostrich feathers, raised a long tortoise-shell lorgnette and fixed Madame von Marwitz through it for a mute, resentful moment. Madame von Marwitz, erect and sublime as a goddess in a shrine, looked back. It was a look lifted far above the region of Lady Montgomery's formal, and, after all, only tentative disapprobations. Divine impertinence, sovereign disdain, informed it. Lady Montgomery dropped her lorgnette with a little clatter, and, adjusting her heavy diamond bracelets, turned her sleek mid-Victorian head to her neighbour. Gregory did not know whether to be amused or vexed. It was now his part to carry on a conversation with the great woman, and he found the task difficult. She was not silent nor unresponsive. She listened to his remarks with the almost disconcerting closeness of attention that he had observed in her on their meeting of the other day, seeming to seek in them some savour that still escaped her good will. She answered him alertly, swiftly, and often at random, as though by her intelligence and competence to cover his ineptitude. Her smile was brightly mechanical, her voice at once insistent and monotonous. She had an air, which Gregory felt more and more to be almost insolent, of doing her duty. Bertram Fraser's turn came, and he rose to it with his usual buoyancy. He was interested in meeting Madame von Marwitz, but he was a young man who had made his way in the world and perhaps exaggerated his achievement. He expected people to be interested also in meeting him. He expected from the great genius a reciprocal buoyancy. Madame von Marwitz bent her brows upon him. Irony grew in her smile, a staccato crispness in her utterance. Cool and competent as he was, Bertram presently looked disconcerted. He did not easily forgive those who disconcerted him, and, making no further effort to carry on the conversation, he sat silent, smiling a little, and waited for his partner to turn to him again. Had Gregory not taken up his talk, lamely and coldly, with Madame von Marwitz, she would have been left in an awkward isolation. She answered him now in a voice of lassitude and melancholy, leaning back in her chair, strange and almost stupefying object that she was. Her eyes moved slowly round the table with a wintry desolation of glance, until, meeting Karen's eyes, they beamed forth a brave warmth of cherishing, encouraging sweetness. "Yes, ma chérie," they seemed to say, "bear up. I am bearing up. I will make meringues of them for you." She could make meringues of them. Gregory didn't doubt it. Yet, and here was the glow of malicious satisfaction that atoned to him for the discomforts he endured, they were, every one of them, making meringues of her. In their narrowness and their defects ran an instinct as shrewd as it was unconscious, that was a match for Madame von Marwitz's intelligence. They were so unperceiving that no one of them, except perhaps Betty and Karen, who of course didn't count among them at all, was aware of the wintry wind of Madame von Marwitz's boredom. Yet if it had been recognized it would have been felt as insignificant. They knew that she was a genius, and that she was very odd-looking, and that as Mrs. Jardine's guardian she had not come in a professional capacity, and might therefore not play to them after dinner. So defined, she was seen, with all her splendour of association, as incidental. Only perhaps in this particular section of the British people could this particular effect of cheerful imperviousness have been achieved. They were not of the voracious, cultured hordes who made their way by their well-trained appreciations, nor of the fashionable lion-collecting tribe who do not need to make their way, but who need to have their way made amusing. Well-bred, securely stationed, untouched by boredom or anxiety, they were at once too dull and too intelligent to be fluttered by the presence of a celebrity. They wanted nothing of her, except perhaps that after their coffee she should give them some music, and they did not want this at all eagerly. If Madame von Marwitz had come to crush, to subjugate, or to enchant, she had failed in every respect, and Gregory saw that her failure was not lost upon her. Her manner, as the consciousness grew, became more frankly that of a vain, ill-tempered child, ignored. She ceased to speak. Her eyes, fixed on the wall over Sir Oliver's head, enlarged in a sullen despondency. Lady Montgomery was making her way through a bunch of grapes, and Lady Mary had only peeled her peach, when suddenly taking upon herself the prerogative of a hostess, Madame von Marwitz caught up her fan and gloves with a gesture of open impatience, and swept to the door, almost before Gregory had time to reach it, or the startled guests to rise from their places. Chapter 18.